You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 19th of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Briefing, in association with Addis. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Tom Edwards. Coming up on today's programme, Monocle's Chris Chermak and Julia Jen will be here to share their take on the Zelensky and Trump White House meeting. Chris is here now. What will you be focusing on, Chris?
Tom, I think I'll focus on the shift in tone taken with Donald Trump, also from European leaders, as well as Zelensky, and whether Ukraine can really get security guarantees from the US and Europe.
More from Chris in a moment. We'll also be talking business news today with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. Ewan, what have you got for us?
Tom, I'll be looking at why it really is intel inside for the US government as the White House considers taking a stake in the chip maker.
Ewan, thanks. More from you too a little bit later. We'll also head to Bodrum and we'll bring you a story with real bite before the end of the show. So stay tuned to The Briefing with me, Tom Edwards. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Great to have you with us here on The Briefing, live from London. Another day, another pretty extraordinary White House meeting here to discuss Trump x Zelensky 2 in DC, plus the NATO and European leaders session as well, are both Monocle's senior news editor Chris Chermak.
Hello, Tom.
And Monocle writer Julia Jen.
Hello.
You're both here. Julia, I'll throw it over to you first of all. Just give me your reactions first of all. Pretty extraordinary. Obviously, think back to last time. Zelensky was there in his little jacket. I don't know. I felt somewhat sad. I don't know why about that. But what was your take? What was your initial reaction?
Total relief. And thank God, because Zelensky was listening to the European leaders who clearly taught him how to do diplomacy. Sorry, not to be harsh about, Ukraine's, my family's country's leader. But I think that Zelensky had a very, very obviously tough time back in February when he last went. And Ukrainians were despairing because he was listening to his inner circle, who are not equipped for the kind of high stakes level of diplomacy that was going on yesterday. And clearly he was listening to Alexander Stubb, the Finnish Prime Minister, who has, used his golfing kind of love to really influence Trump. And, Zelensky gave Trump a golf club from a Ukrainian soldier who's used golfing as a way to rehabilitate. He lost his, he had an amputation resulting because of, an injury on the front line, and he's used golfing as a way back into the joy of life. And Zelensky handed this over to Trump, and Trump was so enthused. And there was that letter as well from Olena Zelenska to the First Lady Melania Trump. So yeah, there was a lot going on there, a lot being taught by the European leaders to Zelensky. So it was great. I was very happy.
Chris Chermak, your first sort of reactions watching another, it's always sort of grimly, awfully compelling watching Trump in action live. But what did you make of yesterday?
It is, but also compelling watching the European leaders and, as Julia is mentioning, watching Zelensky and how they have all shifted their tone. It is fascinating to watch. I thought it was particularly interesting just how kind of subtle everyone was in that. On the one hand, they're extremely thankful for Trump, saying he's the one who started all of this. So all that messaging of thankfulness towards our dear leader for leading all of this. But at the same time, it was interesting that all of them were making their sort of not so subtle points on what they still want. And I thought that was impressive as well. The amount of times that security guarantees was mentioned by each of the leaders. So thankful to you, Donald Trump, but also for the fact that you are now offering security guarantees for Ukraine. They all threw that in and sort of framed it as if it was his thing. This is something that makes sense for the US to do. So it's interesting that all the leaders focused on what they wanted as well from that meeting, but in that language that helps Donald Trump. The only one, I have to say, who didn't quite get that memo was Friedrich Merz. And I thought that was an interesting moment because the German chancellor was the only one who decided to make his thing about ceasefire. And he said ceasefire about 7-8 times. directives. And yes, it is important, but it's the one thing that Donald Trump did not agree with. Everyone else was sort of focused on what they know that he already wants to see happen, Donald Trump, but also working with him on that. And security guarantees is the most fundamental thing.
Well, talking about what we want or expect to see happen, obviously various multilateral talks continue today in DC, and we know that at these kinds of meetings people will meet on the margins and try and nudge different narratives and discourses along. Julia, what do you expect and what would you like to see or hear in the next 12, 24 hours?
Yes, I think a continuation of what they were talking about yesterday. So this Article 5 without joining NATO. And I think that's a great sign, really. I think it's a stretch of the imagination, of the Western imagination. Ukraine can't be part of NATO, according to kind of all Westerners in that sense, because it's beyond kind of our realization of what the Western world is. And yet Ukraine is being offered something that basically brings it into NATO, brings it within NATO's kind of shield, this Article 5 sort of guarantee, and US troops on the ground. Are we really hearing those words? That was so sort of reassuring, I think, for Ukrainians all over the country, because as soon as US troops are on the ground in Ukraine, that changes the game entirely. And I really hope that's something we continue seeing. Of course, the Russians will push back, and we've had Lavrov today saying that Russian security interests have to be respected, Russian speakers in Ukraine have to be respected, all these things, all these imaginary attacks on Russia from within Ukraine, on Russian speakers, etc. But yes, US troops on the ground, I think that's the thing I'm clinging on to.
We shall listen out with a great deal of interest. Chris, what about from your perspective? And it was funny, there were some classic Trumpisms yesterday. I raised an eyebrow when he started bridling at... He went off on a tangent about mail-in ballots, didn't he, US, and how he's going to get rid of them and corrupt. And he said, it's the only country where this happens. Somewhat against my understanding, certainly of my own ballot casting here in the UK. There were a couple of things that he mentioned where you said, well, hang on, that's not exactly correct, that I thought were interesting.
I mean, there were a few, of course, in any of these meetings that were mentioned. One was the fact that he said this is the only war still going on that I haven't managed to stop. I mean, there's still Gaza as well, which we might want to talk about on a different show. The other one that struck me was he was so proud of having all these leaders at the White House. He said this was the first time that all these leaders have gathered at the White House. Personally, I mean, not to nitpick, but I remember being in Washington, D.C. covering the G20 summit, which was this massive thing after the 2008 financial crisis when everyone from the world came to Washington, D.C. to try and stop the world from financially imploding. That was a pretty big one as well. So as usual, yes, there were a lot of these comments on the margins from Donald Trump and the mail-in voting, and he had to go into other areas as well. But nonetheless, I think it is important to say, as Julia said from the beginning, in the general context of how these things go, there was relief because most people, including Trump, were generally speaking on message.
Chris and Julia, fab to have you both with us. Thanks for joining the programme. And of course, listeners will be looking out for the latest pronouncements as the day unfolds in DC, and Andrew Muller and his guests will be unpacking today's developments in much more detail on the Monocle Daily. That's coming up in around about, well, just a whisker under 6 hours from now here on the station. Right now, though, with the clock at 8 minutes past midday in London, let's hear from Anita Riotta, who's standing by with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Tom. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders have held talks with Donald Trump in the White House about ending the war in Ukraine. Following the meeting, Trump called Vladimir Putin to discuss a meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian leaders. Hamas says it has informed mediators that it has approved a proposal for a Gaza ceasefire deal. The Israeli government has yet to officially respond to the deal, which would include a 60-day truce. Israeli attacks have continued across Gaza this morning, killing at least 26 people. The Hong Kong government has summoned British and Australian envoys after both nations granted asylum to two prominent pro-democracy activists. The arrest warrants targeting Hong Kong activists living overseas has been a point of friction between the city government and Western countries like the UK. El Salvador's newly appointed education minister has mandated military-style inspections in public schools nationwide. The former military officer issued a directive requiring students to maintain clean uniforms and appropriate haircuts starting this Wednesday. Teachers' unions immediately raised concerns about potential abuses of power against students and educators. That's the news today. Back to you, Tom.
Anita, thank you very much indeed. More news headlines, of course, coming your way at the top of the next hour here on Monocle Radio. Let's put today's big business stories squarely in the frame now. On the line, we have Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. Good afternoon, Ewan. Just hearing there. Do you have an appropriate haircut, Ewan? I wonder.
I'd like to think so. We're very professional here.
Absolutely. It was never in doubt. Now tell me, good news, Ewan, for Intel shareholders. Potential new investment. Tell us about this one.
Tom, yes, there is a lot to process today for Intel investors, if you'll excuse the pun. First up, we have a $2 billion investment in the beleaguered chipmaker by Japanese tech group SoftBank. Now, it's a strong vote of confidence in Intel by one of the biggest names in the world of tech finance. SoftBank shareholders, though, don't seem quite as taken with the move. Its shares closed down 4% in Tokyo earlier today. One analyst saying that he didn't quite see how the investment will add to either SoftBank's value or to short-term earnings. It's been a rough old few years for Intel. I'm old enough to remember when you couldn't buy a PC without having Intel stickers all over it. But the company's really fallen behind in the AI chip race. It's worth about $100 billion now. Compare that to Nvidia, the most valuable company in the world and the leader in the AI chip market. It is worth more than 40 times as much as that. But perhaps the other more significant story today, Bloomberg's learned that the Trump administration is in discussions to take a stake in Intel of about 10%. Now, if that comes to pass, it would leave the US government as the chipmaker's biggest shareholder. We're told the government's plan is to convert some of the Biden-era chip grants from the CHIPS Act, massive handouts for the industry, into an equity stake for the US government. Now, it's a long way from wholesale nationalization, but it's really an interesting move nonetheless. Unlike European nations, the US has really a very limited history of its government taking stakes in or buying private companies. And you remember the short-lived rescue of General Motors during the global financial crisis, but there really aren't many other examples. So if it does come to pass, it would be really another radical departure from US orthodoxy.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So we'll keep an eye on it, Ewan. Let me ask you next about tariffs. We've discussed before, of course, on the programme, but a sweeping new tariff list from the Trump administration. This includes a large number of consumer items. I suspect I know why, but tell us what's behind this.
Yeah, I've been on the briefing many times talking about all the geopolitical implications of Trump's tariff policies. But this new edict from the White House is really causing a stir amongst US importers. One of the president's favoured sectoral tariffs is on steel and aluminium. And the Customs and Border Protection Agency has just issued a massive widening of the catchment of that measure. The tariffs will now take in more than 400 consumer items that contain the metals. And the list includes car parts, plastics, furniture components, motorcycles, even baby booster seats. It is a lot. And those involved in the shipping and logistics industry that we've spoken to have been really taken aback by the sheer scope of the measure and the sudden implementation. But there is predictable happiness at US steelmaker Cleveland-Cliffs. It thanked the Trump administration for taking decisive and concrete action that will deter tariff circumvention occurring in plain sight. So some, at least, very happy at this new tariff measure.
I guess it's got to please somebody, right, Ewan? Great to have you with us, Ewan. As always, that's our good friend Ewan Potts from Bloomberg joining us here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. 13 minutes past midday here in London, 7:13 a.m. if you're listening in New York City. A question for you. Is there an ultra-luxe boom happening in the Eastern Med? Well, let's head to Bodrum and find out. Joining us on the line is Grace Charlton, Confect and Monocle's Associate Editor for Design and Culture. Greetings, Grace. How do we find you?
Maraba. Hi, greetings from Bodrum.
Well, I was going to say, set the scene for us. Use your words, Grace. Paint a picture for me. Where are you right now?
It's a work trip. I feel like I have to preface this, but I think it's the Lord's work in a way. I'm sitting in a beautiful villa. I'm looking ahead of me. I can see the Aegean Sea calling my name, but there's nowhere I'd rather be than talking to you right now.
Very convincing. But tell me, Grace, listen, interesting question asked playfully. Ultralux boom. Interesting. Lots of talk about the pace of development in this market where you are. Is it leaning into almost over development? Tell me about the mood. What have you discovered since you've been on the ground there?
So, I mean, it's really interesting. When you land into Bodrum Airport, you have to drive for about an hour to get to where I am. And as far as you can see, there is quite a lot of construction going on. A lot of it is, like I said, ultra luxe. It's well done. It's very beautiful. But, it's tough when people come to a region for unspoilt beauty, but then everyone comes at the same time and you have to cater to it. I was in Albania, for example, last summer, and that was really, you could see the pace of construction was, full throttle.
Well, yeah, and this is what I wonder. What is the clientele? Because Bodrum, we know, draws definitively an international crowd, but is it still, I don't know, is there a large number of younger Turkish tourists heading that way?
Yeah, there are lots of young Turks, if you will. I don't know if I can say that. I think I can.
Well, you've said it now.
It's definitely still a very Turkish crowd, and you feel like the people who are actually working here are Turkish as well. Their English might be a little bit limited, but I think there is definitely international interest. That's why companies like Bulgari, the jewelry brand, I'm sure you know, Tom, and Scorpios are sort of setting up camp here and trying to attract maybe Arab money, Russian money. It's a mixed bag, but still very Turkish, which is interesting.
Well, yeah, and just give me your educated take, Grace, on what that vibe is, because I think people will know there's this kind of easy, shabby, Euro, boho chic. Is that the sort of the design vibe, and do you see that in hospitality settings as well as in retail and running through the piece?
For sure. It's the rise of the Euro boho design. That's what I'm going to call it. It's sort of like mid-century in spirit, but with a laid-back Mediterranean appeal. I can see a lot of like raw linen canvas, lots of dark wood furniture, which is made from really thick planks of timber. There's a lot of exposed stoneworks. It's a little bit hippy-dippy, but in a really tasteful way. I've inhaled a lot of Palo Santo since arriving, which I'm not complaining about. It's very nice. But, I think there's almost an Ibiza element to it as well. People come here to recharge and feel the magnetic energy of this. Oh God, I've been here for too long. I'm sounding like a hippie as well.
No, I like it. Tell me, because we've got. It's a shame. I think summer might have. I had to wear a jacket today here in London just to set the scene for you. This way round, Grace. A little bit lead in the skies, but still kind of clammy. It's not great. What are you most excited about? I don't know how much longer you have left on your trip. Anything that you've still got to check off your to-do list?
I'm leaving tomorrow, but I'm having a cocktail with the general manager of Scorpios Bodrum tonight. So I think I'll look forward to that. I'm sure there'll be lots of like pulsating house music playing in the background while I sip a fennel margarita or something like that. I'll think of you, Tom.
Classic Grace Charlton vibes. Grace, lovely to hear from you. Look forward to hearing about your adventures. When you're back in Blighty, that's Monocle and Confect's Grace Charlton in Bodrum for us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Yes, that's right. An absolute institution turned 50 years old this month. Not me, listeners. I'm not quite there yet. Getting there. Jaws, one of the biggest blockbuster. Maybe it's the definitive blockbuster movie. 50 years young this month. And joining us now on the line, I'm delighted to say, is Michael Bright, author of the new book White Shark, a biography of the fish that scared the world. Michael, a warm welcome to The Briefing. And tell me, the story of the great white shark, it is the story of Jaws, isn't it?
It really, Jaws put it on the, in front of the general public. I think before Jaws, people, who were interested in biology and marine biology and that sort of thing, they would have known about the great white shark and they would have known about the kind of things that it does. But it was when Steven Spielberg made his film, and before that, the book of the same name, they really pushed it into being. The only thing is, it pushed it in the wrong way.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you, Michael. I was going to, because listen, we were a bit flippant and glib, and apologies for that introduction. We have to play that classic John Williams score if we can. But yeah, tell me why, in some respects, then Jaws did do The Great White a disservice, because we must, as your book makes the point, marvel at one of the great sort of amazing, timeless wonders of the natural world, right?
Yeah, it's an amazing animal. For one thing, it's pretty big. If you can imagine a shark 6 to 7 meters long, a large female would be that long. And, in South Africa, you can watch this animal come straight up out of the water. That's 6 meters of shark coming up out of the water and landing back down with a huge splash. So when you see it, and when you see it for real, and you look down into its eyes, you can see that it's looking back at you, and you get an idea that it's actually an intelligent animal. And one of the mistakes that were made in the film was that this idea of there being a rogue shark, which is going to attack people, going to target people, as opposed to anything else. Well, they don't do that. What white sharks generally are doing they're unbelievably inquisitive. They will approach somebody on a surfboard, say, or a paddleboard, and they will look around and check it out. And people who are swimming in the surfs, we look pretty like a sort of seal, which is one of the main foods of some of the larger sharks. And a seal which is behaving in a really strange way. So a white shark is going to take an interest. And what it does is it comes and takes an exploratory bite. It's not intending to eat you. It's just a bite. But if you can imagine a shark which is 6 meters long and it takes a bite, it's going to be pretty debilitating. So that's why people get hurt. But interestingly, the number of people who survive a white shark bite incident, it is very few.
Yeah, an amazing journey. And Michael, our compliments in how well you capture so much of the mystery and the amazing sort of journeys these creatures go on. In your book, congratulations on White Shark, a biography of the fish that scared the world. That was Michael Bright, its author. It's published appropriately enough by Bite Back. I believe you can get hold of your copy now. Michael, thanks again. That, though, is your lot for today's edition of The Briefing, which was produced by Tom Webb, research by Henry King, and studio managed by Elliot Greenfield. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Tyler Brûlé will be your host, live in Zurich from 1300 CET. Do join him and his guests for that one on Wednesday. But for the Tuesday edition, that's all. I'm Tom Edwards. Goodbye. Thanks for listening.